Right, kia ora everyone, welcome. I'm going to get us going with the karakia and then introduce Brooke to you. So, karakia te matanga. Manakitia tēnei hui, manakitia tēnei ropu, manakitia tēnei whanau. Tainoa ki tēnei kaupapa. Arahina nā kōrero, arahina nā patai. Arahina nā ture nei kia puta ai te maramatanga. So bless this meeting, bless this group, family as we come together for this gathering. Guide the discussion, guide the questions, guide the intent so that we move on to greater understanding. So welcome, Brooke, welcome everybody. And we are really, really delighted to have you here today, Brooke. So we've got Brooke Trenwith from Potential to Performance. Brooke is herself a neurodivergent person and a fabulous coach, trainer, educator, and an advocate for the rights of neurodivergent people, improving the inclusion and belonging for marginalized groups and children. And your work spans quite a lot of age groups, Brooke. You don't just educate and train in the space of the young kids, also the adults, and creating more neuro-affirming spaces where our adults can work, in more supportive environments and more inclusive cultures and environments. So you have a lot of sort of different, I always think of you as somebody who wears different hats and is spread across different spaces. And so it's wonderful to have you here. But look, introduce yourself to us in your own words. Who are you and what makes you who you are? On
Thank
to
you,
you.
Brianne. That's yeah, that's I often wake up in the morning and I'm like, which hat am I wearing today? Where am I? What am I doing? What's going on? Also, what hotel am I staying in right now? And what country am I in? And what's going on with everything? So originally, I am a secondary trained teacher, trained back in 2000. And taught across all levels. So I've actually, though secondary trained, I've taught early childhood right through to university level. So I've been right through all the areas, including being an assistant director of an English language school in Taiwan for 3 years as well, which is where I started really getting passionate about inclusion, being in that different culture and seeing how neurodivergent individuals were being treated, which was not neuro-affirming, would be the way to describe it in the early 2000s. It really shifted me. And then I came back to teach across Aotearoa, and I'd come from being assistant director of the English language school, which I did for 2.5 years, and suddenly told I was a first year teacher. So I was like, okay, that's good. But I'm going to need something to keep my brain occupied. So that's when I sort of stepped into the inclusion space fully, that I was teaching, but I needed a lot more to keep me going. And left teaching about 13 years ago now, walked out of the classroom, very much in neurodivergent burnout. At that stage, I'd only been identified as gifted. I was identified as gifted at 25. After I left teaching, I was diagnosed as dyslexic at age 32, and then diagnosed as autistic 2 years ago at age 44. So, so a
Gosh.
little bit of a neurodivergent
Yeah,
journey
yeah, yeah,
myself,
yeah.
and then really just wanting to make the world a different place from the experience I had growing up, and particularly being late diagnosed, wanted to dig into what we could do differently across all sectors.
Mm.
So I've been working in the corporate space for 9 years now, still in the education space, but also in personal coaching and development support as well.
Amazing. Amazing. Look, the only reason I said the wow with all the diagnoses was because you've had them staggered. And I was just thinking in our brain, you would have gone, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then a few years later, oh, okay, that makes sense now. And then again, that makes sense. So that's why I was like, wow. It's quite a journey, isn't it, of self-discovery. Um,
Really is. I
yeah,
don't think I'm done yet. I think there's a few other labels to come, to be honest. I
yeah,
don't know whether I'll go formally diagnosing them, but certainly if we think under the neurodivergent umbrella,
yeah,
there's over 400 different labels. And I'll often say to people I'm working with, we kind of collect them like scout badges. You
yeah,
know, we get one and then we learn a bit more and then we go, oh no, well that's there
yeah,
now and this one's there. So particularly, I mean, with the autism diagnosis, I would never have been diagnosed at school because I can make eye contact and I can people.
yeah,
In fact, I can people really well.
yeah.
So there would still be some GPs in the country that would go, well, Brooke isn't autistic. Um,
Mm,
so there's
yeah,
still that little bit of, I guess, confusion over what these labels are and how do they represent, because we are so drawn on the stereotypes
yeah,
and so influenced by those. And particularly, I mean, if you've been following the Trump administration over the last couple of days, it's been on all the media that suddenly Tylenol causes autism.
yeah.
It's an interesting thing since we've actually been around for a really long time. A lot longer than paracetamol has ever been around. So sorry, it's not there if anyone is going for that. Um, and I think for me, the autism diagnosis was probably the most powerful for me
Okay.
out of all of them, because it did shift my version of what autism meant. Because even though I worked in the space, I had my own lens, and that
Yeah,
shifted it.
yeah.
And also the people closest to me, how they reacted to it. So I had
Mhm.
my husband was saying, I'm not touching that with a barge pole. When I told him, he went, okay, I'll just accept that. My best friend going, yeah, wondered when you were going to work that out. We've known for a while.
Yeah.
And then principals that I've worked with, some absolutely shocked and surprised, and some like, yeah, we just thought you weren't open and weren't telling people about it. So
Really interesting.
yeah,
Um,
fascinating.
One of the things you mentioned, Brooke, it really strikes me, as a parent, because, I've got my kids on the spectrum, and I've got two children who are very different from each other on the spectrum. And in all honesty, I think their differences sort of have drawn them apart. And so for me as a parent, it's been like, oh, like my two children, how do I get them to bond? How do I but over the years I've just come to realize it's not that they don't bond, it's just that they're very different to each other. And so they are themselves learning to obviously live with each other and, understand each other and things like that. Just like I'm learning to sort of accept that, I've got two children with huge sort of differences, although they're both autistic. Anyways, I'm now starting to discover how do you live and work with a autistic adult, a partner, no diagnosis, nothing, but and again, that's another journey. And I always think to myself, how come I can be understanding and I can have compassion for my children, but I can't have that same compassion for, my partner who is an adult. And it just really, really is a different dynamic, different way of thinking, relationships, responsibilities, everything, roles, it's so different. And so it's been very interesting for me. Just, it feels like I have to learn all over again now how to, engage and interact and be in this space. So yeah, it's really fascinating, and that's why I've always been amazed that you work in the space of, children and training, people who work with children, and then also the adult space and people in the, workspace and sort of work culture space. So yeah, I really do admire that, because it takes a lot of that shifting, and so yeah, with your mindset and the different things that you have to consider when you're looking at a smaller age group, younger age group, and an older, age group, whether it's teenagers or adults.
It's fascinating because one of the biggest things that I found when I started working with adults is how often they will talk about their experiences at school, and that
Mhm.
it's off. And that's almost when I started getting into the trauma informed practice as well, because it was
Yeah,
it was sitting with them from the
yeah,
experiences
yeah,
they had, that they were continuing on, whether they're working as a leader, and
yeah,
I'll talk to them to, I'll ask a question, tell me about a leadership challenge you have. And
yeah,
they'll talk about when they were put in front of the class while the teacher went out. and
Wow.
how they responded and how
Yeah.
I came back to them. And I think that's when I really realized that there was such a connection between the two.
Yes.
And even when we're talking about relationships in the workplace, there's so much that's around also relationships inside the
Mm.
classroom, and how so that feeling seen, heard, and valued across every dimension that you're working on
Mm.
is powerful.
Yeah.
It's really powerful,
And you,
and particularly the work. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And you carry that with you, isn't it? It's kind of you carry it from one space to the other. Whatever you've started out with, often we just carry that in our heads, in our minds, in our hearts, in our bodies, into that new space. And we always start seeing everything through that lens. And I think th this is why sometimes I think that early start in life needs to be really positive, needs to be, where you show acceptance, where you really, really make sure that children are valued and they kind of, come out with a really strong sense of self-identity. And I think for me, that's what I've fallen back on over the years, and I've realized that every time I've felt like I can't do this anymore, or I'm just, really struggling, or I start seeing things through other people's lens or a deficit-based lens for myself or my children. And I think what has helped me is that early start in life where I was always valued. I was always told you can do anything, you can, um, do whatever you want. And I think that that is such a strong foundation, isn't it? That helps to keep going. Um,
absolutely.
Tell us with all your sort of diagnosis over this sort of, staggered um diagnosis over the years. What was it like for you? You've mentioned about how others reacted. What was it for you? Was it a positive, negative discovery sort of, yes, finally I know what's happening, or was it I've got to sit with this and really start making sense of now, who I am again? What was that like?
It's really a mixture of both. I sort of see it a bit like almost a grief cycle, that you get angry and then you get upset and then you go into denial and then you're all of those things, and then finally find some acceptance before you jump back into the cycle again and go through those processes.
Yeah.
Um, the with the gifted diagnosis, which then I ended up working in the gifted field for a very long time and president of the New Zealand Association for Gifted Children, and that one was such a relief for me, that first diagnosis, because all my life I'd be watching people
Mm.
and try and be like, and I'd be watching them going, they're liked. Okay, so how do I do that? And if I do it exactly like they do it, then people will like me and people will see me and I will belong. And in fact, like my strongest memory of as a child is sobbing myself to sleep most nights and going, when I'm an adult, I will fit in. And then becoming an adult and not fitting in was just like, oh my God, I've waited years for this. And suddenly I'm still not what other people think that I should be. I'm still too much, or I'm still not doing things they want them to.
Mhm.
So there was a relief with the first one that I could stop trying to be normal,
Yeah.
that was okay to do things differently.
Mhm.
And I embraced that for a number of years. And I think certainly my career took off by embracing that allowing myself to no longer consider what other people thought of me or try and hide in the background and be invisible, because it was sort of, well, people are going to attack wherever they attack. So go with it. Um, the dyslexia one just made absolute sense to me. It was just like, oh, okay. I'm not just bad at spelling. Because I remember I was an art history major at university with my undergrad, and I got a paper back and it said, this is an A plus essay and it deserves an A plus mark. But because you spelt Rembrandt wrong through the entire thing, I'm giving you a B plus. And I spent hours looking at it, how my lecturer had spelt Rembrandt and how I spelt it, and I couldn't see the difference. And I didn't understand. So for a long time, I was questioning what is it and why I struggled so much to enter passwords. particularly in schools where they read the password out to you and I'm just like, yeah, could you just type that in there, because this is not going to work for me, or writing it down is not going to work. It's not a shape of a word I can recognize. Yeah, so that one's good. And then the autism one, I probably should have been gone for a diagnosis earlier. I think I was in denial for a long time about that one. And I had particularly a number of teachers would actually ask me about how I felt when I first got my diagnosis. And I'd have to sort of say to them that I wasn't diagnosed and I wasn't autistic. And they'd look at me quite strangely and go, oh, okay. So, but it took me a long time to get that, and to be comfortable with it. And then when I got it, I think it was like the next day I went and got more piercings in my ears, because now I had an absolute excuse to not be like everyone else. And yeah, booked in for a new tattoo and all of those things, and just went, yeah, no, I'm allowed to. I can do this now, or I can go and change my hair a funny color because it's allowed with that. Yeah.
Oh, look, it's amazing. You know, the way you were just saying just now that with the diagnosis, you felt now you're allowed, and we still have these preconceived notions, don't we? You know, as we start off on our journeys about this is how things should be, or this is how it should be. And then, like, you know, you go down 5 years down the line, or, you know, 10 years down the t line, and you start realizing, you know, how much you're boxed in again, and you've got to sort of free yourself of those boxes and become more authentic, you know. And I think that journey of being truly authentic is an ongoing one. And I've started to realize that we can obviously only be authentic when we are safe, right? In where we are, who we are, and all of that. And I feel like I've had you know, parts of life where I felt safe and I could be authentic, and then not quite so, or spaces where I'm not so safe, and so I'm not as authentic. And then, you know, you slowly sort of get that courage and you decide, no, I'm going to be more authentic in this space. And that keeps going on, isn't it? You know, as you start sort of connecting within yourself, feeling more safe, you know, in who you are and your sort of own self-identity, you keep discovering and moving along the journey, isn't it? So it's diagnosis is, I guess, only one part of it, and then you've still got the discovery happening bit by bit as you grow your safety, as you grow your connections. Really interesting, yeah.
Like diagnosed as well, people often say to me, oh, so do you still mask? And I'm like, look, I've got no idea when I'm masking and when I'm not, because 46 years of doing things in a particular way.
Yeah.
So the masking becomes very difficult. And the only way I can look at when am I masking and when I'm not is the energy levels that I'm expending.
Mhm.
That when
Yeah.
those masks come off. Particularly after the autism diagnosis, my friendship circle got a lot smaller, because I went, well, if I have to script a conversation, but when we go out to dinner, I probably don't want to hang out with you anymore.
Yeah.
And that was sort of my key that I was beginning to mask. But now, as sort of I dig into masking more, which is a fascinating one with the neurodivergent individuals, because people often, when I'm training people, either at schools or in organizations, they'll go, oh, we need to get people to get the masks off. And I'm like, that's not your call.
Mm.
That's the masking can actually be incredibly positive. And masking doesn't have to be acting neurotypical. Masking can be the weirdest person that you've ever met, or being the class clown, or being highly, highly aggressive. All of those are forms of masking. And the Pearson and Rose research that came out that actually talked about masking for particularly autistic individuals, but I see it across all the neurodivergent individuals I work with. It's not about being the same.
Mm.
It's about controlling how people are going to respond to them.
Mm.
And that's been a real shift for me. And it's something that I see particularly in workplaces and particularly in schools, because the teachers will say to me, oh, this child isn't masking because they're being really strange in the classroom. And I'll be like, actually, no, that's their mask. They've been rejected in the past. And because they've been rejected in the past, they are going to ensure that we reject them because then they have control over it,
Yeah.
right?
We've just got a
Um,
comment that says, can you explain a bit more about masking?
yeah, how's it shows? Oh, I've got a diagram. Let me do that. And yeah, I completely agree with you, Lara, that if we increase that psychological safety, we can choose whether we wear a mask or not. So in the States at the moment, psychologists are telling people to put the mask back on because it is
Mhm.
not safe out there. The psychosocial safety is not there.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
the mask, bring up my lovely little diagram here. This is how I tend to explain masking, both at schools and organizations. We're looking at inside a social situation, we have emotion suppression, we have eye contact management, we have interest minimization, conversation scripting, expression mimicking, impression overthinking. And then if we do all of that, then we're socially acceptable. And in a workplace, we're professional, and in a schooling environment, we fit in and we belong, right? But all of that just takes so much energy for us to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think one of the points you made is so important. Um, Masking is something that only the individual person can decide whether it is helpful for them or not, beneficial for them or not. When they are ready to take it off or need to put it on, isn't it? And so I
Yeah,
think it's really important that as sort of, parents, educators, people supporting neurodivergent children and youth even, we don't try and push them into with the well sort of intentioned approach.
absolutely.
Oh, but you don't
Yeah,
have to mask, you don't need to, feel comfortable, you can relax. And I think it's so important that we don't, because just by doing that and just by pressuring them to do that, we're basically saying, your masking is not really acceptable or not really needed, not really sort of, um, acceptable, and you need to let go. So I think we've got to be so mindful about it, isn't it? In
yeah,
terms of our understanding of it, but also then how our children and neurodivergent
yeah.
individuals,
And
yeah.
I think particularly for families, so if parents are watching this or educators are watching this, one of the biggest conversations I have with schools around masking is that the educators will say the child is fine at
Mhm.
school. Um, and the parents will say they come home and they explode. And the educators will go, well, that's an issue at home. They're fine at school. And they're actually the Coke bottle kids. They have masked so much all day that when they're safe, they explode. So if they're exploding at home, they are not fine at school. That psychological safety is not there for them. And when we think, a piece of research, I think came out a few years ago, of by the age of 7, an ADHD child has had 20,000 more negative messages than a neurotypical child.
Mhm.
That is going to impact every part of their life moving forward. And that's that cumulative trauma that we have through neurodivergence not being recognized, is that it builds up and it builds up and it builds up. And people will gaslight about it and go, it's not an issue. If we think in the workplace, managers will say to me, no, everyone has to have their video on Teams. And I'll go, well, these people don't like it. And they'll be like, well, they just have to deal with it. Well, there's a real difference between dealing with it and it actually affecting you so much that you're going to be taking extra sick leave because your video has been with how much energy that's taken.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest things for people. And I guess that connection between trauma informed and neuro-affirming is that it's not the massive things, it's the little things that build. And
Mm.
those little things we can actually do something about.
Thank you so much, Brooke, for sharing that. I was just going to ask you, what does trauma actually look like in that neurodivergent space? And you've already answered it. And I guess First of all, people don't have always a good understanding of trauma, and it always sort of
Mhm.
most most of the time people think trauma is something really big that happens, right? Something a big event, something major that's happened.
Yeah.
And it's so important to understand that that's not the case. Trauma can be those little words, little actions, little glances, little snickering that happens, on a regular basis that then impacts you. And again, trauma is not necessarily the events, the actual
Mm.
event. It's how you're holding it all in and how you're processing, those
Yeah.
experiences. Or, you don't even have someone or somewhere safe to sort of process those experiences.
Mm.
But tell us a little bit about for our autistic children, youth, our ADHD sort of youth, where does that trauma come from? And, what are the kind of those little interactions that we've got to be careful about to make sure we are not, adding to the trauma or not re-traumatizing them. For me personally, as a parent, my own journey started because I was feeling like my children didn't belong, which meant, as a result, we didn't belong, we weren't wanted. And for me, it was that ongoing rejection over and over in different ways, different words, different sort of, over the years, sort of, it really finally got to me. And that's when I
Mm.
realized, I thought, gosh, this is me as a parent sitting on the outside of school. If our kids are in the school, in the classroom, how much more do they hear and see? And how much more do they experience that makes them feel rejected?
Yeah.
So, yeah, share a little about, what can we be doing in this space?
Where I particularly focus around neurodivergent trauma is using Shanker's research around the 5 areas of stress is one of the first places that I'll talk about, and the fact that
Mm,
we've got these different areas of stress. We've got physical or physiological stress or biological. So if we think about that in regards to how loud is a classroom,
mm,
so health and safety requirements, 85 decibels over a period of 8 hours on average. For many neurodivergent people, we can't handle over 56. But it's a health and safety is much higher than that. So that's a physiological trauma that will come through. Lights is one of my favorite things to do whenever I'm presenting. I'll actually show people, I'll video the lights on slow motion, and then I'll turn it around and I'll show them how much the lights are flickering. And they don't need to be. There's just the doohickey inside needs to be fixed, but you can't see it with your naked eye. But for a neurodivergent person, they are seeing that. They're seeing it and it's triggering them. And same with it, actually, someone who's been through trauma, it will trigger them, that flash of that light, right? So we have these physical stresses that will come through right up to the texture of uniforms with people with
mm,
sensory issues. We've got people who are hypo or hypersensitive inside the physical as well. So hypo, they need to have extra stimulation. We often see with our kids at school, they are going to hit and they are going to fight. And it's actually them trying to get that sensation. And then what
mm,
the trauma comes from is they're told off around the hitting and the fighting, rather than we're going to replace that sensory with something else. We're going to show you how to do a desk push-up, or we're going to show you how to have the weighted blanket on your leg, which will give you the sensory stuff that you need, which
mm,
means when you get dysregulated, you're not going to hit someone, right? So we get that physical response coming through. Then we have the emotional stress that comes up, and the emotional stress very much around for many neurodivergent people, over emphasizing with people that they're physically feeling what people are saying. So often people have this image of Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory for neurodivergent individuals, and they don't recognize sarcasm and they don't recognize emotion. There's the other end of the spectrum where we just hear and feel everything, and that's where I sit, and I can walk into a room and I can pick up everyone's emotions at the same time. But for a 5-year-old kid doing that, the only thing they can do is think, I've caused those emotions. They're because of me, right? So we have that building up through there. We have the bullying, we have the teasing. We have a lot of gaslighting. So particularly for highly sensitive ones of, oh, just shake it off, it's not a big deal, when in fact it physically feels like a big deal for them. So those things to begin to build up. We've got the cognitive stress of the masking, but also for most neuro individuals, at the end of the day, they lie in bed and they go through every single interaction they did over the course of the day, trying to work out, did they do it well enough to pass, right? And if they didn't, 10 years on, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, they're still going to be thinking about that one time they didn't do it right. And that feeling is going to be the same. It hasn't shifted. So we have that cognitive overload. We have the misunderstanding, which one of my favorite, you can Google it if you haven't seen it, but Hannah Gadsby's piece from Douglas on it's on Netflix, and she does a piece about penguins and prepositions and boxes and that. And it's one of the best ways, highly inappropriate language, but one of the best ways to actually get inside a neurodivergent person's head and see they are fully engaged in what you're talking about, but you're actually speaking a different language, right? So that cognitive stress builds up. Then we've got the social stress. So a lot of neurodivergent people, particularly gifted, have asynchronous development. So they're different ages inside their head all the time. And things, it's often called puppy feet. They haven't grown in some places. Yeah. And you'll have them and they'll connect well with an adult, but they can't connect with their same age peer. So they'll be told that they're immature, that they can't do anything. They won't be allowed to walk around with a teacher at lunchtime, all of those things coming through. So that social stress comes in. And then the one that's a surprise to most people is called pro-social stress. And in pro-social stress, what it is that it's the judgment of other people. So parents of neurodivergent kids, their pro-social stress is massive. They will have family members saying they are this way because you did not discipline them enough as a child, or you let them get away with stuff, or why don't you punish them? Where are the consequences? With people not fully understanding what these are. They're the ones who they'll be in the supermarket and their child will have a meltdown and a stranger walk past and look at them and go, right? And that pro-social stress adds up and it adds up. In the workplace, the pro-social stress comes from the introvert who's in an open plan office. So at lunchtime goes out by themselves and doesn't go to the lunchroom, and then doesn't get the promotion because they're not seen as social enough. Right. And that comes into it. So all of those stresses are those tiny little things that build up and build up. Yeah. And particularly in my work on an individual level, we look at how do we lower those so that then we can deal with the big ones. Yeah. Because if we've got those ones kind of just small little things to connect with them, then the big ones we can deal with a bit easier.
That is amazing. The bit that you mentioned about how not being social enough then punishes you and takes away opportunities which others might have is such a critical one, isn't it? Yes. Because connections and knowing people open up the doors for so many people. And it is a very accepted way of functioning. And nobody actually thinks twice about it. But there's so many individuals who lose out, not because they don't want to be social, but because they can't, because it is a huge, demand on them. It's a huge effort and it's not always doable. So it's really interesting. I had never quite thought about that way. But, when we think about it in a children's sense, the younger ones, they're the ones who don't get invited to birthday parties when everybody else does. They don't get invited to, sleepovers because they haven't done the socializing as expected. And so it's really, really interesting, that pro-social stress. I actually always wondered because I've seen that visual, Shankar Stewart's of the sort of 5 areas of stress, and I always wondered, what exactly was the pro-social one? So thank you for clarifying that. That's a real
The,
good.
the other one on the pro-social, which is interesting at the moment, just to highlight, is particularly in the last 3 years, the demonization of devices. That's sort of hitting, we've banned, we haven't, the ministry's banned cell phones in schools.
Yeah,
That was in a socially acceptable way of a neurodivergent person recharging,
yeah,
and it's been taken away. The there was a piece of research I read several years ago that said that neurotypical people get the most pleasure from relationships with other people. Neurodivergent people get the most pleasure from relationships with objects, activities, and places.
true.
And a lot of times that is their device, and it's that space of being able to. So if we think in one of the workplaces I've worked with, very large open plan office, about 120 people on this one floor, an open plan. They start the morning every morning with a waiata and a karakia. We have permission for the autistic individual to go down to the meeting room where his first meeting is and play a word game. But we needed to get permission to do that because it was felt that he wasn't embracing the culture of the community without realizing he was actually physically in pain listening to people sing. It was not something that gave him any pleasure whatsoever. So very much that intent that you're talking at earlier, the statement I use a lot with everyone I work with is, what is the intent and what is the impact? Because you're coming in with really good intent, but because we're dealing with someone who thinks differently, the impact is not meeting that intent. So it's not that you're a bad person and you're doing something wrong. It's just that we need to look at how we do things differently.
Um, Very interesting. School assemblies are a
Yeah.
huge, huge space. I remember, and again, I was starting out my journey. My kids were quite young, and
Mm.
I remember I was so adamant as a parent that I wanted my child to attend assembly because I wanted him to be included, to be part of it. And I still remember my middle child loved it. He was fine, he really sort of enjoyed being there. My oldest would have his moments of, no, I don't want to sit here. I don't want to be part of this. But my youngest sat through the assembly with his ears shut and just rocking back and forth. Um, and it's quite interesting, Brooke, the labels we put and how we sort of categorize, individuals. So my oldest would be sort of categorized as a very high needs child. He doesn't speak, autistic,
Yeah.
cognitive delay, all of that. My second was considered a bit less than, his needs. But the youngest was actually considered as functioning a lot more than his brothers, no cognitive, delays or anything, could speak. And so the expectation on him was a lot higher. And yet, when I look back and I reflect, I think the assemblies were hardest on him, although he was seen as the most capable and seen as the most, you know, you can fit in, you can do this. And
Yeah.
yeah, I actually remember, it was when he finally, because he was the youngest, and when he started sort of, and when I started seeing what was happening, I was like, maybe, he shouldn't be there. Maybe he needs to have headphones or sort of, be in the background. Because although he was perceived or considered as being, more able and less disabled than his brothers, he was the one who was impacted most by that environment and space. And so it's so important for us to remember that just because a person can function well and do certain things does not mean that they then don't struggle with, a lot of these other stressors around them.
And
Um,
it's also looking at it that just because someone's got a label doesn't mean their needs are going to be the same as someone else who has the same label.
sure.
Because that's often that we see. So I've seen in a workplace, I've gone in to mediate between people where a manager's gone on a neurodiversity course. They've learned that autism
Mm.
people like structure, and they've come back and told a 46-year-old person that these are the times they're going to go to the bathroom, right?
Okay.
Great intent, but horrific impact, particularly because the person was AU ADHD, so they didn't like schedules in any way, right? So
Go.
it's almost so whenever I'm doing a presentation, I talk about the fact that professional learning and professional development are two different things. Professional development is you doing this workshop with me or the training day or having a coaching conversation.
Yeah.
Professional learning is you accepting, rejecting, or adapting it for the person that you need to work with or the context that you're in. And what I do is I put out this buffet of strategies and go, these are different things that could work, but
Mm.
there may be others.
Yeah.
And it's working with the person and collaborating with the person and with the child and with the parents. The parents know what's going to work, right? Most of the time with
Absolutely.
some things, or they definitely know what's not going to work and they're going to be dealing with when they come home. But often that knowledge is not valued
Mm.
because people go, I've done a course, I've read a book. It doesn't work that way with neurodivergence.
And collaboration is one of the key principles in terms of becoming trauma informed and
Absolutely.
adopting trauma informed
Yeah.
approaches. So you cannot
Yeah.
apply anything, I guess, that you have learned that, you have acquired knowledge of without the person being at the center of whatever
Yeah.
it is that you're doing and having the, I guess, the voice, the choice, the control over,
Mm.
what's being developed to support them. And
Yeah.
it's really interesting when you don't have that. There's so much of sort of fallout that happens because of it, isn't it? And just by including the person, putting them at the center, having their voice and choice front and center, you can avoid so much of
Mm.
the stress and back and forth and challenges.
I think with one of the things we had on to talk about today was that neuro-affirming and trauma-informed, are they the same
Mhm.
thing? And if we think about, I take neuro-affirming as acknowledging, respecting, and supporting different ways of being as a natural form of human variation, and that it's something that makes the world a better place is how I look at neuro-affirming. I see so many working across both spaces. I see people doing neuro-affirming practice that is not trauma informed, and I see people doing trauma informed practice that is not
Yeah.
neuro-affirming.
Yeah.
So it's almost like this Venn diagram. We've got this magic, beautiful spot in the middle that if we do that, we're going to be meeting all of them. But then we've got some trauma informed stuff where it's like, well, these are the strategies that
Mhm.
we know work, neurotypical person, so we're going to do them with a neurodivergent person. So breathing is a prime example. So um, getting the mindful breathing happening, often for neurodivergent people, they're going to overbreathe when they're doing that, and it's actually going to cause them harm. So it's again looking and having that collaboration with them. um, Teachers will often talk about, well, I teach them SMART goals, but for SMART goals for neurodivergent people, SMART goals don't tend to work. So when you're doing a trauma informed approach around SMART goals, we're still not getting the right thing that we need to have with that. But then likewise with the neuro affirming, we'll often have the thought of, well, we've put in an accommodation, so it's going to work. But if that accommodation is not recognizing the trauma that they're carrying and supporting them to rebalance or regulate with the trauma that they're having, then that accommodation isn't going to work.
And the thing with trauma is, people hold it in their bodies and
Mm.
people live with it and
Mm-hmm.
they interact through that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's going to
Yeah.
be so different and unique in each
Mm.
individual's sort of, context. And
Absolutely.
just because arching sort of trauma-informed approaches or practices, um, you can't guarantee that it's going to work for this person unless you have checked in with them, unless you've, really
Yeah.
got to know them and understand them. And I think, for me as a parent, I know my child quite closely. I've sort of I see them in context, not just in the here and now, but what happened before, what happened the day before, what could have triggered, what could have caused, the meltdown that happened
Mhm.
today, like could be from 2 days ago, like, so you've got all that context sitting in your head. I think for professionals, you may not always have that context sitting in your head. You don't know, you
Yeah.
only come across a little snippet of this person for a few hours and you don't know all of that context going behind that sort of gone on
Yeah.
behind the scenes for this person. And so it's so important, isn't it, that we come with compassion. And my thing has now been, because again, as my kids are growing older and they're doing more things with others and with, support workers and things like that. I always don't have that picture that I used to have, solid picture of, what's happened 2 days before, 10 days before, and how it might impact now. I don't always have it. And so for me, it's really important when I don't understand. I just don't understand, but I still hold compassion. I still have to hold that space of actually something could have, I don't know what it is. I may not know at all, but I still need to sort of keep that in the back of my mind and show up with compassion, show that patience and work through it. So I think that's so important, isn't it, when you don't know the full picture, because it
I think
can be
as around neurodivergent people as well, you're never going to know the full picture. Um, you know, it's if I think about my own stuff that I carry when I go into a traumatic response, people around me will go, okay, let's look for the antecedent. What happened right before, right?
yeah,
It's generally nothing about that. It's more about the fact that these tiny little things have happened through the week, and I don't know what's going to happen next week. And then that's leading up to it. So, and I think part of the thinking about it is that my brain will go, oh, but if I know what's causing it, I can control it. And from a trauma informed response, it's actually we don't need to know the cause.
yeah,
We just need to know that this is happening and how to help ourselves get through it and accept that this is what we're going through. And I see that on IEPs all the time where there will be, we need to do this to ensure this doesn't happen. And I'll be like, yeah, you can do that, but it's still going to happen because you're not addressing other things that are leading up around that.
yeah,
And we're all built up in um, this ableist viewpoint, right? Even for I've worked in the space for 25 years, but I'll have an ADHD client not turn up for a meeting and my brain will go, oh, they don't respect me. Right. Now, I know that
yeah,
is not the
yeah,
case. My brain will go,
yeah,
you know, if they tried harder, they could do this. And that's when you've got that ableist lens coming through. And we see that in workplaces, we see it at schools, we see it with parents. Parents say all the time, if they just tried harder. No, no, they're trying really hard.
yeah.
We need to go, where is the scaffold to support them to make it easier?
It's so interesting, isn't it? Linda, you've made a comment about, what is trauma-informed approach in schools, and there's so many different ways
Yeah,
of doing it. And you're absolutely right. It really, and this is why I wanted to ask Brooke about the whole thing
yeah,
around, is trauma informed the same as being neuro-affirming, or is it different? And I love how you've explained it, in terms of finding that sweet spot between the two of them. And yes, there's overlap, but also we have to learn to let go of the not knowing, isn't it? Like wanting to know. You're not always,
mm-hmm.
and so you have to let that go. And I think for me, that has been quite hard as a parent initially, and I can do it now, but it's taken me a while to get there, the not knowing. And then I think in some ways, the knowing was really important for me because I needed to justify my child's behavior and my child's
Yeah,
actions to somebody else. And I think that's the other bit where I've just gone, I don't need to anymore, I don't
Release
care.
that
Yeah,
process.
yes, I've
Yeah.
really, because I think as a parent, I've wanted so much of, initially I just wanted so much acceptance for my children, so much
Mm,
inclusion for my children. And I've realized over the years now, as we've grown, my oldest is 20 coming on to 21, and I'm like, it's okay. He doesn't have to be accepted in every space and every, sort of space that he enters. It's all right. Some are going to be inclusive, some are not. So long as we have, a good amount of good positive experiences for him. Experiences that affirm his self-identity and who he is and value him for who he is. That's fine.
yeah.
Because, life is never perfect. It's never a bed of roses. And I think to some extent, I kind of apply that logic to my kids as well. Doesn't matter if they've got a disability, they're neurodivergent, whatever it is. It's just life. And so we've got to accept it. Um, but I think for me, it's really important that professionals working with our kids start understanding that
Mm,
they don't always know why they're behaving in a certain way, but it is coming from that trauma response, from the nervous system, activation. And so being able to hold space, being able to be non-judgmental in that moment is so
mm,
important and critical. And
yeah.
supporting recovery and then supporting repair is so important,
Mm,
isn't it? To build that
yeah.
sense of safety and connection. Yeah, so
And whatever that repair looks like for the person, right?
understanding
That's
that.
another thing of judgment. I spoke at a conference a few years ago about, um, and I was talking about when my cat died and how I repaired, and that I played Candy Crush nonstop for 2 weeks and binge watched How I Met Your Mother and didn't talk to anyone. And I had someone from that conference make a meeting with me. It was a trauma informed conference that I was presenting at, and to tell me I was wrong and how I grieved and that I had issues obviously in my marriage and things like this. And I was stunned. So this was someone in the trauma informed community, but because I did not grieve the way she grieved,
Yeah.
I was wrong. And she told me all the research about grief and how I should be grieving. And I said, yeah, but that doesn't work for me. And I said to her, do you define yourself as neurotypical or neurodivergent? And she said, I'm neurotypical. And I said, well, what the hell gives you the right to tell me how to
God.
grieve? You know? And I see that all the time where people will be saying, no, but you need to do it this way. Actually, no, we need to listen to the person experiencing it and help them reflect on whether or not that works for them. If it doesn't work for them, then yes, we need to give them other ways. But if it is working for them, and that's the same with device use with neurodivergent kids, when I'm working with parents around that, I have a little graph that I give them of time spent and how it impacts the well-being.
Yeah.
And every week they do that graph with their kids. And if it's that it's a lot of time, but they're feeling good, then
Mm.
we don't fix it. But if they're spending a lot of time and they're not feeling good, that's when we need to intervene because our neurodivergent kids, again from Shanker's research, is they're hypodopamigenic. They don't have enough dopamine in their system because of
Mhm.
they're living in a world that is not designed for them. And I love the statement of we're playing life on the hard level is where we are. Everyone else is playing it on the easy level, and we've got every barrier that's coming through with it. So we need the easiest fix of dopamine that we can get in a way that works for us. Yeah.
That is such an interesting way of looking at it. Um, because yeah, the whole debate over devices is always ongoing, even in the parent sort of community, the education
Mm,
community. Um, and yeah, it is a lot of it is downtime, isn't it? And it's time to sort of recharge. It's time to cope with all the other stressors that are there in life.
yeah.
Um,
Right. If that fits in with what Glorianne has just written, she's asked me to share what was Candy Crush doing for me from a sensory and cognitive perspective. It was shutting me down to allow me to process. that if I was doing that, my brain wasn't catastrophizing, it wasn't going everywhere, but it was giving my subconscious the space to process what had actually happened. And I wasn't going to process that any other way other than disassociating from the world and going, I'm pulling back, this is where I am. And it's still my way of doing it. I'm currently binge watching The Rookie on repeat. I think I'm on my 16th time in the space of a month of all 7 seasons. And it's my way of shutting down my brain, going, I can't cope with things happening in the world. They are scaring me right now. So I need to I'll do my work, but then I shut off and then I'll go back.
Wow.
Yeah. And similar, yeah, Margot's being in the flow. Yeah.
That is really interesting. So this is really funny actually because I was very proud of myself for not binge watching for a very long time. And when I was here, people say binge watching. I'm like, why do they do it? Like, how do they do it? And I'm not kidding, but so I used to really hold myself, to these really high standards that I could not keep up to myself. And I remember one school holiday, I decided that I'm just going to let go and I'm going to not, stick to all these expectations that I had put up for myself, even with the kids, like, doing stuff with them and for them. And I thought, I'm just going to take this time for myself. And I did. I binged watched and I loved it. And ever since then,
There you go.
I haven't been able to let go of it. And it's very interesting how you explain, but sometimes I couldn't understand because I'm like, I'm busy, I'm stressed out, and yet I'm binge watching. I'm wasting time on binge watching. And I was like, why am I doing this? But it's something I really need to do. And because, it takes me, out of whatever's happening. So it kind of makes sense now that you're actually talking about it. And I think until you have done
I
it
call it
yourself,
incubation. Yeah.
until you have done it, do not judge it. It is very effective in terms
Yeah.
of, letting go of stuff, processing, recharging. I never thought of it that way, Brooke. But I just thought it just helps me to let go of stuff. That's how, I thought it's okay. I'm wasting time, but I'm letting go of some of the really hard stuff, and then I can, bounce back. So I love how you've actually explained it. That sort of makes sense now. Yeah. Look, we haven't even gone through like half the questions I had prepared to ask you. But this has been so interesting, so fascinating. Can I ask you one last question? I'm gonna have to
Yeah,
see, but
sure.
this is the most important one I want to ask. Um, so I think this will be really helpful for everybody watching. So when you work with organizations who are really keen to make those transformational shifts, they want to invite you over for PD, they want to shift their work culture to becoming more inclusive and all of that, or address some of those, toxic cultural sort of issues that are there. Um, and they're really keen to do it. How do you make sure that they then follow through on that process? What is your process of taking them through it? But also, I guess at that organizational level, how do you set some accountability for them that they will follow through on it? Because people do PDs, like you say, they'll come do a little PD and they'll think, yeah, we've done it. How do they follow through? How do they action it? How do you sort of try and put things in place for them um, to make that happen?
I'm really picky about who I work with. That's probably the first thing to be clear about. If organizations get in touch with me and I can tell they're checking a box,
Mm.
I don't engage because it doesn't, or I triple the price for them because it needs to be worth me going in and doing it because I'm just going to get frustrated and grumpy and angry. Um, when I do, I'll give you another diagram here with the organizations. Hang on, try that again. Um, I use Sengi's 6 conditions of change when I am working with them. So 6 conditions of change are,
Sorry, Brooke, are you sharing? We can't see anything.
I'm just about to bring it up. It
Oh,
just
okay, that's all
decided
good then.
to
All good.
do a little
Yes.
thing for me, which is always fun. So I'm just going to bring it up again for you, and then we will be fine. Yeah. So this is it here, Senge's 6 conditions of change. So often you'll have organizations that will contact you for learning, and it's very much around these structural change conditions or the explicit things, policies, practices, resource flows. That's going to make a very, very small difference inside an organization, and it's certainly not going to become embedded. And in fact, it's when we're up here, it's very much the tick the box part.
Okay.
So the majority of work that I do with organizations, I will give them this stuff at a very, very basic form. I'll give them examples, things like that. But the work that they do with me is around power dynamics, relationships, and connections, which is our semi-explicit structural change, and about the mental models. So we're actually touching on every single part of their workplace, particularly around their leadership, because the leadership is going to be where it is. Now, one of the things that we know, and we know it from so much research, particularly Bishop and schools, Bishop and Berryman, when you cater for the marginalized, you meet everyone's needs. And that's very much what I do with the neurodivergent stuff. I will come in and I'll go, this is what's going on, and this is where we can go. But by doing this, this is how it's going to impact every single person. Now, got to be careful with that, because often I'll do that and people go to me, I think everyone in this room has just diagnosed themselves as neurodivergent because those things happen to them when you're talking about it, because I'll deliberately give a neurotypical example in neurodivergent, but then I'll give them something like this, where I'll give them my metaphor for psychosocial safety with neurodivergent individuals is, for neurotypical people, psychological safety is like fire danger in New Zealand. You can be on low for about half the year, and then every so often you head up to extreme. For neurodivergent individuals, it's like fire safety in Australia. So even in Kuma, where I work in the snowy mountains, there is no low. You always have to be on alert. You need to be making sure that you're being safe and that you're setting things up in a right way, because if it hits, you're going past extreme and you're going into catastrophic, and you're going to be dealing with so much. So very much in organizations, to ensure they do it is to ensure that they're actually seeing that the value for everyone through doing that. And that's where my organization work tends to skyrocket. And the fact they'll bring me in for a day to work with a small group, and within 2 days I've got all these emails going, we want you to work with this team, we want you to work with this team, can we redefine what we're doing with that? And then that's when you get that growth. From a change management perspective, as soon as you get 3 people doing something different in a team, it is going to snowball, and it's going to begin to create that culture shift, whether it's something good or something bad. So you're looking at it. So I'm always getting people in sort of groups of 3 going, who are the 2 that are going to do this with you? That's going to begin to shift it. And if we think about that work in Kuma, I'm back in Kuma at the moment, working online with them. And I'm laughing because I haven't worked with them for a year. But one of the key things I say all the time, which is an acceptance and commitment therapy technique, is, and that's okay. So something will be going wrong and I'll go, and that's okay. Every single coaching session I have, people will say something and then they'll go, and that's okay. Right? Because it's become part of their communication system. And I'm like, yeah, this is great. This is great. And that's how it embeds.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves in terms of getting it right, and we forget that it is a journey. It's an ongoing journey to learn and grow and improve and become more inclusive, and it's just ongoing. And I think that's something I've started to really realize. And I've sort of taken, I guess, the pressure off my own self, because as a parent, you don't want to get it wrong for your kids. And every now and then I do. And all I do is I go, I'm really sorry. Like, I am
Yeah.
sorry. Like, I'll do better next time. And with my youngest one, we have these really interesting conversations because I've taught him to be sort of really self-advocating. And I've taught him to speak up from a child who
Mm.
would whisper and wouldn't
Yeah.
really share what he, thought or needed or how he needed to be supported. He's become a, young youth who now tells me exactly what I've done wrong and, why I'm
Love it.
I'm
Yeah.
not being reasonable and all of this. And so now I have to really take that feedback on and sort of adjust myself. So it's really interesting. Also, how you said the bit around you've got to find the people to make the change
Mm.
happen, the really effective thing. And I think it's a lesson I learned really early on in my journey, where I thought initially, if I can get policies changed and if I can get the right resourcing and the structural sort of shifts and
Mm.
practice shifts, then things will change. And I very soon realized, it's not changing. I need the people on board. I need the individuals to really believe and to really buy into inclusion. And without that, it won't sort of really shift. So I think that's really important as well, isn't it? To bear in mind that you've got to build the connections, you've got to have the individuals on board if you want to make systemic and organizational shifts. Yeah. So yeah, starting sort of that bottom up approach is so important. Look, Brooke, thank you so much for coming along, sharing with us your wealth of information. And I'm sure we can do another whole Kōrero with the remainder of the questions that I
The
have.
questions we
I'm
can.
always,
Yeah.
I'm always over sort of, aiming for with the questions. Really cut them down. But now I would love to have you again another time as well. And, we can carry on with it. Thank you so much for all the work you do, all the fabulous support that you offer, across sort of the spaces and communities that you're working in. And yeah, what's up for you before we close? What are you
Before we
looking at?
close,
What's big on your sort of, horizon? Yeah,
I've got a great conference next week I'm going to be at. So
yes.
that's sort of first on the horizon. So looking forward to catching up with you in person there and
Yeah.
seeing everyone there. I'm currently refining the final parts of a micro credential for Victoria University. So that I've been running that for secondary teachers for the last few years around combined, it's called contemporary classroom practice. And we've got videos from Linda and from Catherine in there as well. So we include trauma-informed practice in there, neurodivergence, and really practical aspects. And that is being released for primary and intermediate and secondary teachers next year. So I'm putting the final touches on that. Um, what else am I doing? Schedule's booked for 2025. So I'm just about to open 2026
Mm.
and start allowing people to book in there. Um, I've got my online courses that run. So I've got the conscious inclusion bundle. So they're going out to schools just after the conference as well for people to sign up with those. So there's about currently 75 different video courses on there to support schools. Um, and I'm currently thinking about writing a book. That's kind of in the head. I don't quite know when the time will come for that, but that's floating. That's where I am.
Oh. Oh, that is amazing. I am so glad to hear that the training that you're doing, the course development that you're doing
Yeah.
for teachers
Mm.
includes trauma-informed approaches and
Mm.
practices. I think that is pretty
Yeah.
much how we were formed as a group, wanting to really get trauma-informed education happening.
Yeah.
And that's how I met so many of the wonderful people, including Linda and Kath, and So many others who have become sort of a regular part of the NATINA community. So thank you. And thank you so much for coming along to the conference next week. It is
Thank you.
so
Yeah, thank you for
exciting.
having me. So exciting.
Um,
Thank you for all the
you-
work you're doing, Brianne. You're doing an amazing job. So
thank,
thank you for the dedication and the passion and pulling all this together
thank
because
you.
it's made a difference. Yeah.
I think for me, it's just getting people's voices out there and really sort of amplifying what's happening because there's such fabulous work, people like you, individuals who are doing this work across different places and spaces, and so it's really important we just, amplify it all. So thank you very much, and I will close with a karakia for today. So karakia whakamutunga. Kia whakairia te tapu kia watia ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai. Haumie hui e tai kie. Pomari, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Kia ora.